Hey everybody, what's happening? It is a Thursday afternoon, and Steve and I have been talking a little bit lately, kind of what's going on in our office and a little bit of, what's going on in the world, right? We have so much negativity, for lack of a better word, in our news cycle, right? Everything you hear, everything anytime you turn on, I go on Yahoo and, it fills my feed. Of course, there's an algorithm there, so it feeds me what I like to read, right? And that sucks in and of itself, right? We're gone to the days of Walter Cronkite, giving us the unbiased news, although that had its own downside to it, right? And in those days, one person was the gatekeeper of what was newsworthy and what wasn't. Now we are our own gatekeeper of what's newsworthy and what's not. And so what we choose to click on becomes what we're going to then get fed more of. Does that make sense? So unfortunately, what that puts us in the place of is this goes back to Earl Nightingale, which any of you guys who've ever heard me talk for any amount of time know that I bring up Earl Nightingale all the time, which is the strangest secret. Your thoughts create your reality. In our current news cycle, the reality is that you're going to get more negativity, whether you ask for it or not right now, right? Doom and gloom sells. I want you guys to understand this. Some of you may know, some of you may not. I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism. I spent my first 3 years working in the television industry, and I literally exited the television industry because I could not stand the way that we picked what it was we were going to cover for news stories. It's really sad, but if somebody goes out to cover uplifting, positive stories, it does not sell. What sells is things that tap into the fear mentality, right? Which is why CNN loves it when Hurricane Ian is going on or when COVID is happening, or, and this is not a condemnation of CNN as a news source. I could care less what news source you're watching. They're all doing the same thing. Fox News is no different. NBC is no different. CBS is no different. They love it when there is an event that creates a sense of hysteria because it taps into the human psyche, right? We're all wired for self-preservation. So when things are going wrong, we're wired to pay attention from the time when we lived in a cave. And if we heard a freaking howl outside of that cave, it meant we might be dead and not be able to pass on our DNA. So we are wired for that. Here's the great part of humanity, though, guys, and I want you to take a second and write this down. We have the ability to evolve. We do not have to succumb to what our genetics incline us to do, right? Write that down. We have the ability to evolve. Your brain is a computer. Your thoughts are the programming that you put into that computer. And I stole that unabashedly from Jim Quick. I love Jim Quick. If you haven't read him, KWIK, a book called Limitless, unbelievable. Helps you understand how to transform the thought patterns that you're having, right? And I don't know if anyone's in the chat, Steve. I'm looking at the Zoom call, but nobody's hopped into the Zoom call. If you're in workplace or you're watching this, hop in. I should have done a better job of letting you guys know that I was here because I love this to be interactive. But do me a favor, and I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds here. Put in the chat. I can't even remember what I was going to say now. I was talking about Jim Quick and reprogramming your brain. What percentage of your thoughts do you think are conscious versus unconscious? Write that into the chat for me, even if you're watching this on a recording, right? What percentage of your thoughts are conscious thoughts versus unconscious thoughts? Now, I'm not going to answer that. You guys, if you can't figure it out yourself, you can go Google it and it'll actually tell you that. The why I'm bringing this up is that if you're going to reprogram your brain, it's not enough to just reprogram your conscious thoughts. You have to be paying attention to what's coming up when you're not actively thinking about it, right? What are the stories that you're telling yourself? So I know Steve made the conversation of this, using the 4 S's in these trying times, right? We're in a challenging time. And so the two S's that I'm most concerned about right now today in 2022, when every news article you say is inflation's the worst it's ever been, we're going into a recession, gas prices are going to hit $8, everyone's going to fucking die. We're getting inundated with stories that are negative. And here's the reality, guys. We just lived through this in 2008. We heard the same freaking stories over and over again, and it lasted for a year and a half. And God bless, most of us were okay. People lost their houses. They it sucked. It wasn't fun. But most people lived. And a few years later, got back on track and started creating a life for themselves again that was super functional. So my point being, like, we know that the real story is not so doom and gloomy. It's not the reality of what's happening in 2022. In fact, and this is what I wanted to talk about, you have the ability to choose the perspective you take on what's happening today. I could sit in the office and we could sit and we could cry, and Adil and Anthony and Greg and Alex and I, when we're going through deals, we could say, oh, we're never going to build another self-storage facility again because the numbers just don't work, because land costs are still super high and interest rates are so high and construction costs are so high, and it just doesn't work. Or I could take another perspective, which is the perspective I've chosen to repeat to myself like a mantra. My competitors are backing off right now. My competitors are getting scared. My competitors are not relying on historical data and trends. They're relying on fear. And fear is dictating how they're operating, right? We learned a really valuable lesson from 2008, which is that if you bought property during that massive recession and you held on to that property to rent it, rents went through the roof in 2010, 11, 12. Not to mention what's happening right now, but in those few years after the recession, after the housing crisis, rents went up. Why? Well, people were losing houses that they were paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month on. They were losing jobs making $100,000, $150,000 a year, and they were getting jobs making $75,000, $80,000 a year. And so they were renting. They didn't have the credit to buy. They were renting houses for $1,500, $2,000. Right. And what that did is it took houses that used to rent for $1,000 or $1,500, and it pushed their rental rates up because there was this huge market of people that were moving down a little bit. Now, something else happened in 2008. Self-storage had a 3% revenue growth. Self-storage grew by 3% in 2008. And in 2009 through 2015, 16, they had their highest growth they've ever had. Why? Because when people move, self-storage does really well. So I could sit here right now and I could write this really negative story about how terrible everything's going to be. It's going to be doom and gloom. My God, we shouldn't build another self-storage facility. Or I can sit here and use historical data and historical trends and say, look, what's going to happen in the next 6 months is my competitors are going to sit on the sideline. Land prices are going to come down, right? What we're going to see, and this is just, using math, the typical due diligence period on a commercial project is 90 to 180 days. So we still have things that are under contract right now that got put under contract before the first rate hike from the Fed. And what's going to start happening is some of those contracts are going to fall out late in their due diligence period. And you're going to see some landowners that are in shock because they were going to get historically high prices for their land, and they're going to lose those contracts. And as more of that happens, you're going to see an adjustment in price, and people aren't going to be asking so much for land. It's going to happen. It has to, right? There's no way it's not going to. With interest rates going up, construction costs going up, that's going to have to happen. Now, it might not happen as quickly as I would like, but it's going to happen. In the meantime, what are we going to have to do as a team? We're going to have to dig harder. We're going to have to do more work to get the same number of deals under contract. Are we afraid of doing more work? As a team at Legacy, do you guys think we're scared of putting in more effort to get the same result in a trying time? No, I'm not scared of that, because here's what I know. I know as my competitors fall by the wayside in these trying times, we're going to come out of the trying times. It always happens. We're not going to all die. There's not going to be an apocalypse. And if there is an apocalypse, I'm going to go into it fighting. I'm going to go into it working as hard as I freaking can. If I die, I'm going to freaking look at God and I'll be like, yo, I was fighting. I didn't quit, you know? So we're going to come out of it one way or the other. Hopefully not with an apocalypse, and highly likely not, right? And what's going to happen afterwards? Well, what always happens to rental rates after a recession? They spike. So if I can buy over the next 6 months to a year a bunch of development projects where I'm starting to get the land at a real good value, yeah, I had to work harder, but my competitors fell by the wayside, and thus I had more access to opportunities. I wasn't fighting as hard for them because not as many people were in the blue ocean with me. And I know it's going to take me 3 years to 5 years to get this thing built and stabilized. Well, I know logically that 3 to 5 years from now, rental rates are going to be higher than what we're projecting. They're going to be. There's almost no way that that doesn't happen. And so if I can project them conservatively at a number that works, knowing that it's highly likely my projections are going to be short of what reality is, what's my reality going to look like in 5 years? My reality is going to look life-changing. That's what it's going to look like. And my competitors are going to have missed that opportunity to make a massive change in their overall net worth and their overall equity that they have, right? So this is why if you guys didn't see my webinar, I'm going to have Steve drop a post in the Facebook group for you guys and in Workplace that gives you the opportunity to grab a link to the webinar I did last week on the 4 S's, right? The state of mind that you're in. This is highly important in these times, guys. You have got to be extra careful about the food you're putting in your body, the content you're consuming. What are you listening to? What are you reading? What are you watching? If you're putting garbage into your body, whether it's food or educational material, what you're watching for television, if you're putting garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. We've got to be even more concerned with the state, our physiological state today than we were a year and a half, 2 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, when things were much easier. I shouldn't even say that because that's the wrong mindset. When you weren't inundated with so much negativity. And then it's even more important. And in the webinar I did last week, I went over some specific actions you can take to pay attention to the stories that are going on in your head, right? So look out for that on the Facebook group. Steve's going to drop it in the Facebook group, how you can hook yourself up with a link to that webinar, replay of that webinar. Because once you start rewriting the stories that are going on in your head and you tap in, Napoleon Hill calls it your other self. And if you don't know who Napoleon Hill is, you damn well should, especially today and what we're going through right now. Napoleon Hill calls it your other self. You have this ability to tap into a higher version of yourself that is able to do anything you ever dreamed of, anything. And how do you get there? Well, it starts with some underlying actions of paying attention to what your thought patterns are. And then how are you going to rewire those stories that are going on in your brain, especially when everyone's telling us panic, 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 panic. No, I'm not going to panic. I'm going to pay attention to the patterns that have happened over and over and over again. For literally since we created our country, the economic patterns in the United States have been very trackable. The forces that have impacted recessions have been very traceable over the course of 250, almost 250 years. It'll be 250 years in 2026, right? Really, 1792, I guess, was when the government was really formed in banking. I think that's the year that we, created a banking system in our country. I could be off by a couple of years, but anyway, close to 250 years. So I'm going to rely on historical trends, right? You guys can also drop in the chat box here if you're watching this on replay, What has been the greatest trend of self-storage? Why do we love this asset class more than any other? I'll give you a hint. It's not the massive upticks like you see in a Bitcoin or you saw in tech space, websites. If you remember the dot-com boom of the 90s, that isn't what we love about self-storage. Paul's on here. Paul, I don't know who you are and I can't see your face. If you want to turn your camera on, I love looking at people and talking to people. So if you want to get involved in this, Paul, I'll give you a chance right now. You may not know this, you may. Do you know what the one trend of self-storage is that makes it so we love this space more than any other? Paul's not turning his microphone on. He's been a little shy today. Well, I'll tell you what it is. There's never been a negative year of revenue growth. Not one time in 40 years as a tracked asset class has self-storage ever had a negative year. And so I want to kind of take a second to explain that to you guys. Imagine for a second, we start with a value of 0, right? And then we have an amazing year. We add 20, right? Well, let's start with a value of 100. That's an easier way to do this exercise, right? So let's say at the beginning, we have a set value of 100%. And then we have an amazing year. We have 20% revenue growth, right? We're at 20%. And then we go through a few normal years. And over the course of the next 4 years, we have 20% total revenue growth. So what are we at now? In 5 years, we're at 140% of the original revenue, right? Now, here's the problem. If you have one really bad year and you lose 40% of your revenue, that is 4 times, if you take 140%, 40 plus 16 is 50. You lost 56% of your revenue, right? Now you go from 140 down to 86. You've gone below what you started at with that one really bad year. Now, why I love self-storage is you start at 100, every year it's gone up, right? So you never had that big 20% gain, but you consistently had 5, 8, 10, 3, 2. So as in 5 years, you didn't get to 140 in 5 years, you got to 120, 130, but you didn't have that drop to 86. Your really bad year was 3% growth, right? Now, another asset class like tech that went from 140% of original, dropped all the way down to 86. They can gain 20% again, and they're still back at their starting point, a little over. Self-storage stayed at 130. In fact, went to 133. It's going to take 5 more years of sick revenue growth for tech to catch up. So I'm going to study these historical trends. I'm going to understand what 40 years of data has told me, and I'm going to write that story in my head. I'm going to lean into that story. I know that rates in self-storage are going to go up. Why? Because we're going to have disruption in the housing market. We're already seeing it. We're seeing more people starting to move. We're seeing rental rates start to come down a little bit as people are a little bit nervous to spend money. That's going to create people moving. People moving means people using self-storage. Self-storage facilities are already at full capacity. What happens when there's more demand? Increased demand, lack of supply, higher prices. So for me, the story I'm writing in my head right now, based on historical data, I'm not making this story up out of nothing. This is not Hansel and Gretel, right? I'm not doing a fable. I'm trying to think of who wrote all those stories. There's a writer that was famous for that. It's not coming to me, so that's all right. It's not make-believe. I'm not writing a tall tale. I'm relying on facts, not feelings. The news and the media that you consume, if you let it, will write a story based on your feelings, because people buy on feelings. They buy on an emotional response. I'm not going to get emotional about it, because that's not how our team is going to build legacy wealth. And at the heart of everything we do, that is our goal. That is our vision. So I wanted to take a minute for you guys today. If you don't know the 4 S's, Steve's going to drop in the group and in Workplace as well a link to go watch my webinar so you can really get tied into what the 4 S's are. Majorly important to you. State, story, strategy, standards. Your strategies and your standards are real important right now too. but really your physiological state of being and the stories that are going on in your head. I urge you guys to be ultra protective of those. It is going to help you thrive. A down market is where you really have an opportunity to get wealthy. Hope this resonated. Hope you took some gems from it. If you did, please leave me a note. Let me know. And I look forward to doing this again with you guys. And I'll do a little better job at advertising. So hopefully a few of you guys are on here with me.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Dad.